First, there was a blue one. Then, there was a red one. In the first Star Wars film in 1977, we don't really see lightsabers do all that much. I mean, yeah, we see them lop this dude's arm off and we see them turn an old man into gas, but that's pretty much it. And the first ever games based on Star Wars didn't really have much to go on, so they themselves reflected that more humble expression. As the filmmaking technology became more sophisticated and the world of Star Wars itself became more fleshed out, we started to see Jedi doing more interesting and more creative things with lightsabers. And then the games that are based on Star Wars would also reflect this growing complexity and sophistication. It has been 40 years since the release of the first ever lightsaber computer game, with lightsabers appearing in some 40 odd games over that time. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the evolution of the lightsaber, its design, its application, its evolution over time. I want to look at the interaction between these different mediums, how the relationship between all these different mediums changed the aesthetics, the lore, and the usage of the lightsaber, making the lightsaber what it is today. So sit down, grab a cup of tea, and let's go through a brief history of lightsabers in computer games. We're starting right at the beginning with Star Wars Jedi Arena from 1983. It's one of the first ever Star Wars console games, and it is the first ever lightsaber game. The first time we ever really see Luke interacting with his lightsaber on screen is blocking bolts from that training remote on the Millennium Falcon, so that's what this game is. Next we have Star Wars on the Famicom, and in this game the lightsaber is a blue bat. Star Wars from 1991. In this, it's a yellow bat. Empire Strikes Back on the NES does feel like a significant increase from Star Wars on the NES. In this, Luke has access to force powers. One of them is that he can enhance the lightsaber power, and the other one is that he can reflect enemy shots back at them. So this is the first appearance of a lightsaber being able to deflect enemy blaster fire back at them. The first time we ever see this on screen is in Return of the Jedi, when Luke is on Jabba's barge and we see him deflecting those blaster shots. But it's in Empire here, so hey, that's fine. The next lightsaber game is Super Star Wars from 1992, and what did Super Star Wars add to the formula? This somersault. Technically, Super Star Wars is a step back from what we had in Empire on the NES, because Luke actually loses the ability to enhance his blade and to reflect enemy shots. As this game is adapting A New Hope, Luke is earlier on, he's more of a noob, so it makes sense from a gameplay perspective, so we can't really give it that hard a time. Moving into Super Empire, blocking and deflecting are back, but this is also the first time you can throw a lightsaber in a computer game. We first see lightsabers getting thrown in Empire Strikes Back, and it becomes a much bigger thing later on, but Super Empire is the first time you can ever throw a lightsaber in a computer game. But what's super cool is you can actually control it on screen by using the D-pad. And then there was a green one. This is the first significant evolution of the lightsaber design. Now, it wasn't until Return of the Jedi that we saw that lightsabers could come in more than two colours. Originally, George Lucas actually only wanted two colours, blue for the good guys, red for the bad guys. It became clear that a blue lightsaber just wouldn't show up well against the blue Tatooine skies in that barge scene, and this is the big reveal where we see Luke's lightsaber for the first time. So George just thought on his feet and said, okay, fine. Luke's lightsaber can be green. Fans went bananas and immediately started drawing crayon drawings of all their lightsaber sonars. George did not intend for any more colours than that. This was the one time he was going to break that rule. By 1997, we'd seen lightsabers expanded in the EU. That green lightsaber idea suddenly meant that the doors were blown wide open. The Tales of the Jedi comic, which is set hundreds of years before the original trilogy, started to suggest that maybe lightsabers could be far more diverse than what we've seen on screen. they started introducing double-ended lightsabers, as well as yellow lightsabers and purple lightsabers. It was really around this time that coloured lightsabers really started to become a thing. And the way in which the EU explained this was the lightsaber crystal. In an early draft of the original Star Wars film, Luke Starkiller has to take the magic Kyber crystal to the floating city of Alderaan. Crystals were a really big part of the original drafts of Star Wars. Now obviously that didn't happen, but George didn't put that idea away. Before Empire Strikes Back was greenlit, there was an official sequel novel to Star Wars called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. And in this, Luke and Leia go down to the planet Mimban, where they find the legendary Kyber crystal. In the storyboards book, there is even a mention that at some point the idea was floated that the Jedi could hold the crystals in their hands and a magical beam would sort of come out like a sword. And this is obviously the very first pre-runner to the lightsaber. Now, George's early obsession with crystals obviously never really came to anything. He never got the opportunity to use these. But again, he never moved away from it. Splinter, of course, was made moot by The Empire Strikes Back, but crystals worked their way into the expanded universe. I can't find a solid source for this, but I'm actually pretty sure that it's common knowledge now. Everybody knows that a lightsaber has a crystal in it. I think that the first mention of lightsaber crystals comes from the 1996 Young Jedi Knight's book Lightsabers by Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Mester. Steve Perry's Shadows of the Empire book, which came out the same year, also mentions lightsaber crystals. I feel like this was the touch paper for crystals being such an important part of Star Wars. Once this had been established though, this blew the doors open for all the creative possibilities that these crystals offered. It was crystals that determined the colour of the lightsaber blade, and there were all kinds of different lightsaber crystals. Adagan crystals, Kyber crystals, artificial crystals. In that lightsabers book that I mentioned, Luke says, oh, lightsabers are really versatile, you can use any kind of crystal in them, but the most powerful crystals are the Kyber crystals. I had the Essential Guide to Weapons and Technology book way back, and I remember the page about lightsabers here, and it expanded on the lightsaber and the staff saber, which you'd only seen in comics up until this point. But I remember it referenced the idea that crystals or jewels could be put in the handle, and that they would help to control the size or the intensity of the lightsaber blade. Anyway, this was a bit of an aside, but I bet you didn't expect a little lesson on crystals hidden in here, did you? So, with that out of the way, 1997's Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 took all that crystal stuff and really ran with it. Kyle Katarn, the greatest Jedi in history, has to save the galaxy from Inquisitor Jerek and his 7 Dark Jedi. Kyle can use his lightsaber to do the blocking and deflecting, all the stuff that you might expect at this point. But Dark Forces 2 is stacked with new stuff. We've got a character with an orange lightsaber, we have a tiny boy with a little tiny orange lightsaber, and we have a huge boy with a huge orange lightsaber. This is the first time we've ever seen different sizes of lightsabers. We even have a guy who carries twin purple lightsabers. Now, using two sabers does actually go all the way back to the 70s comic, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time we ever see two lightsabers in action. There is so much creativity here just with the lightsaber types. I also think this is the first game to show a lightsaber lopping off someone's arm. Of course, way back in 1977 we see Obi-Wan cut off Ponda Baba's arm in Mos Eisley, but it took them 20 years to get that into a game. The technology is maturing and the lightsaber mechanics are getting deeper as that technology matures. Truly, Dark Forces 2 pushed lightsaber representation ahead by light years. And now's the part where I have to talk about Masters of Teräs Käsi. Straight off the bat, what's interesting is Leia is in her Boushh disguise, but her staff actually seems to be like a bit of a lightsaber thing, like there's little lightsabers on the end. In the EU, Leia did actually dip in and out of owning lightsabers. She had a green one in the Thrawn books, she had a blue one in Dark Empire, she has a lightsaber on the cover of Planet of Twilight, and then she gets a red one in the Corellian books. But this thing? I've got no idea. So you'd think that that's really it. There's nothing particularly revolutionary about this game. I mean, except for this one single baller move right here. Except there is a hidden secret character. Mara Jade. Mara Jade with the f***ing purple lightsaber. I made a video a few years ago about Mysteries of the Sith, about how it's the first time you get to play as Mara Jade in a computer game, and boy oh boy did the actually boys come out in the comments section. Anyway, let's actually move on to Mysteries of the Sith, and let's talk about Mara Jade. First introduced in Heir to the Empire, Mara Jade was introduced as the Emperor's Hand, who was this dark side assassin who was sent to kill Luke Skywalker. Spoiler alert, she turns to the light and becomes a goodie. She appears in like 8 novels. By 1997, she was voted the fandom's favourite character who hadn't been in a film. Mysteries of the Sith came out in 1998, so this was a year before the awesome Esquerra Stackpole Zahn comic book, and so Masters of Teräs Käsi and Mysteries of the Sith is the first time we actually get to see Mara Jade, and it's the first time we get to see that purple lightsaber. One thing which is significant though is Mara can throw her lightsaber here, which Kyle couldn't do in Dark Forces 2. This is big because throwing the lightsaber has been missing since the 2D games, and the way in which it works in this game is pretty much copied in every game from this point on. Hot take. It is the ultimate goal for a Jedi to stop using their lightsaber. A lightsaber only has one use, and that is violence. So ascending beyond the need for violence is the ultimate goal of all Jedi, which is why up until this point Yoda had never been drawn with a lightsaber. Arguably that's the same for the Emperor too, you know, they're on to like bigger and better things. Anyway, Mysteries of the Sith absolutely gets this. I can't give you any spoilers, but damn, the coolest thing about a lightsaber is knowing when not to use it, and this game nails it. Trilogy Arcade from 1998 is probably the first game to try to introduce natural motion to the lightsabers. It was an arcade cabinet and it had like a flight control, like a joystick on the actual cabinet, and you'd use this on different levels to like fly spaceships and whatever, but there were also lightsaber levels where you'd use the flight stick to control the lightsaber. It's probably the first attempt at doing motion controls. It's not quite there, but this is still significant. We're now at 1999. I'm sure you know this, but the next big shift in the depiction of lightsabers was the prequels. The Phantom Menace game from 1999 is pretty crude. The previous games felt like they had some finesse to them, but this kind of feels like stepping back to Super Star Wars, back to the glowing bat. I wouldn't say that we're getting the sophistication that we've seen so far, but just look at this game. Come on, it's so charming, it's so cute. It is so much fun to play. I would argue that the biggest jump in on-screen lightsabers ever is this moment. The first appearance of the double-ended lightsaber blew my mind, and this is the first appearance of the double-ended lightsaber in a game. It isn't in a playable capacity. That came later, in 2000's Jedi Power Battles. What I love about this is when all these Jedi were introduced in The Phantom Menace, none of them were shown holding lightsabers, so nobody knew what colour their lightsabers were. But obviously, Lucas Licensing wanted to release action figures, and obviously they wanted to release comic books of this, but there was nothing in the style guide about what they would do. So the illustrators of the comic books and the toy designers, they just went buck wild. Ki-Adi-Mundi got a purple lightsaber, my boy Plo Koon got a yellow one, Adi Gallia has like a pinky one. Also, what's significant about this is Adi Gallia is the first Jedi ever shown on screen holding her lightsaber in a reverse grip. The reverse grip was mentioned a year earlier in the book I, Jedi, but Adi Gallia is the first of many edgelords in the Star Wars universe to be shown holding a lightsaber in the coolest way possible. Is it practical? Who cares? In a hilarious twist of irony, Mace Windu's lightsaber is actually blue. What's cool about all these different characters in this game, it's not that they just have all these different coloured lightsabers, but they all have different lightsaber styles. There's some extremely cool lightsaber moves in here, and there's some cool pickups that can like extend the length of the lightsaber blade. After completing the game, you can unlock Darth Maul, which makes this the first game ever with a playable saber staff. As I mentioned before, George did not want all this diversity of lightsaber colours. This was not his plan, and he went out of his way to retcon all of this back in Attack of the Clones. Well, nearly, of course. Obi-Wan on the Xbox is a really cool stop on this journey because it's the first console game to try and introduce slightly more finesse to controlling the lightsaber. You use the right analog stick to control the direction in which you swipe the lightsabers. For me, I think this is a significant step because it shows that people who are making lightsaber games are thinking that it's not just a sword. Like, they're trying to think about how to bring that elegant weapon from a more civilized age aesthetic into their games. Now, as I mentioned, George didn't like the colourful lightsabers, so he retconned them all in Attack of the Clones, except for Mace Windu's lightsaber. This game is actually the screen debut of Mace Windu's purple lightsaber, because Obi-Wan came out a full 6 months before Attack of the Clones came out in cinemas. In fact, I don't even think the comics switched over until after Attack of the Clones came out. Jedi Outcast from 2002 is a phenomenal lightsaber game. It has this absolutely quality control scheme. You're using the mouse and the keyboard to determine the direction of your lightsaber moves. So it has tons of different lightsaber moves depending on which direction you're moving with your feet and which direction you're moving the mouse in. So rather than like clicking, you're kind of clicking and dragging the mouse while walking around. And this gives you a massive range of motion with the lightsaber and loads of different things you can do with it. You can throw the lightsaber as well, like you could in Mysteries of the Sith. And on top of that, there's also 3 additional lightsaber stances. So you've got like the fast stance, the mixed stance, and the strong stance. This ever so slightly predates the 7 lightsaber forms which were mentioned in Attack of the Clones. Dismemberment is back in a big way. The vanilla game features, a fair amount of stormtroopers losing arms here and there. But if you pull down the console and use console commands, you can turn dismemberment up to absolutely ludicrous levels. This was hands down the greatest lightsaber game that had ever been made up until this point. I spent most of my teenage years being fully obsessed with this game, as you can probably tell. I just thought it was so immersive and so cool to have a lightsaber at your fingertips like this. There was nothing else like it. Oh, the plot is also about crystals, FYI, because we're never getting away from crystals. Knights of the Old Republic, I've just got to say it's probably the least fun to play in terms of a lightsaber game, but it introduces tons of really awesome new ideas for lightsabers. You've got a playable saber staff, which is great, but this is the first game where you can carry 2 lightsabers. Also, because this is set in the Old Republic timeline, it's kind of divorced from George's lockdown of all the lightsaber colours. Like, it was already established in the comic books that back in the day the Jedis had loads of different colours, so it was kind of emancipated from George's ruling in that way. In fact, it went further than that and it introduced its own lore about different coloured lightsabers. It said that blue lightsabers were for Guardians, the Jedi foot soldiers, and green blades were for the Consulars, the more wizardly Jedis, the Qui-Gon Jinns. The yellow blades were for the Jedi Sentinels, who were kind of somewhere between the two. But as the player, you didn't have to stick with these 3, you could have whatever you wanted. KOTOR went out of its way to expand on all these different types of crystals that you could put in lightsabers. You could even mix and match different types. You could have one of each. You could have a double ender that had a different colour on each end. And there was all these different places across the galaxy where you could go and get these crystals. You could go to the crystal caves of Dantooine. I really can't overstate the importance of crystals here. (2003) also saw the release of Jedi Academy, and this is the GOAT, taking everything from Jedi Knight 2 and adding essentially all the good ideas from KOTOR. So we had a double-bladed saber staff, the ability to carry 2 lightsabers at once. You can now customize the handles of your lightsabers. You've got a wider range of lightsaber colors. You've got way more lightsaber moves now. There's rolls, dodge moves, katas. The control over the saber, the stance you're in, the sabers you've chosen, has led fans to actually refer to playing this game in multiplayer as more like a game of chess than it is a straight up sword fight. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I just love that that's what people think about this game. As is quite common in this video, here is another weird little aside. This is the part where I body shame lightsabers, because in the prequels, the lightsabers got fat. This was evidently on screen in The Phantom Menace, but because there's so many more lightsabers in Attack of the Clones, it is so much easier to see. Just compare these two shots. It's night and day. I would speculate that there are two main causes for this. Firstly, I think the props that the actors used to spar with during the making of these films got thicker and they got stronger. The ones in the original trilogy apparently would bend and break a lot. But secondly, I actually just think this is just to push the VFX to the forefront more, and especially, in those wide shots where there's lots of lightsabers, I think you'd want them to be a bit chunkier so that they'd stand out. But what's interesting is that aesthetic actually made its way over to the games. Jedi Academy's lightsabers are noticeably thicker than Jedi Outcast lightsabers. It's just a weird little thing people like me notice. I really don't want to talk about the lightsaber in Rogue Squadron 3, but what I would like to talk about is the cancelled Rogue Squadron Trilogy game by Factor 5 was going to use the Wiimote and the Wii Motion Plus to actually give the very first true motion lightsaber in a computer game, and that actually was super exciting at the time, and I remember being really dashed when I found out that wasn't going to happen. I'm pretty sure that Revenge of the Sith is the first time you ever see a Jedi block lightning with a lightsaber. Now, this was mentioned all the way back in the EU. Heir to the Empire is probably the first time, but do you know what? It probably happened even before then, I'll be honest. But I don't think it was ever an option to do this in a game before Revenge of the Sith. I think it's a little bit sad here because at this point, Star Wars fever was fully in swing. We'd had 3 films, a ton of games. This is like the densest era of Star Wars stuff ever, with the most games released year on year, but we saw very little evolution of what the lightsaber could do in these games. In fact, after Jedi Academy, I kind of feel like it stepped back again. This would all start picking up again towards the end of the 2000s. Due to the fact that Soul Calibur 4 came out 6 months before The Force Unleashed, it was the first appearance of Vader's secret apprentice. And The Force Unleashed is absolute powerhouse shit. Mad lightsaber moves, crazy combos, charging up attacks, adding lightning into the lightsaber blade, all kinds of crazy stuff, and also a crazy amount of crystals. These crystals actually changed the nature of the lightsaber blade as well as the aesthetics. I think this is the first time we see that, where it actually adds things like lightning damage, or you can do more of X or more of Y, as well as being able to swap out and customize the hilts of the lightsaber. It's important to note that customization and the aesthetics of the lightsaber have become quite an important thing with regards to the lightsaber in the Star Wars universe. We've seen this idea mature quite a lot up through Jedi Academy into Force Unleashed, and we know that this is going to go on to be something, even more important in later games. The Force Unleashed also introduced the light tonfa, which is just such a gnarly idea. I absolutely love it. Mechanically, Force Unleashed takes the lightsaber back to being a glowing bat, but my god, this has got to be the highest energy bat whacking you've ever seen in any Star Wars game. Lightsaber duels on the Wii tried to use motion controls. It tried to take that idea from the cancelled Rogue Squadron Trilogy game, but really it's just more waggling. I do think it's important because we can see now that developers are really trying to give that sense of control to players, and I think it's important to have that here because we know that's something which is just only going to grow more. The Force Unleashed 2 comes out in 2010. It's the first game to have someone holding 2 lightsabers in a reverse grip. That's not really that significant, but I mean, it's just super cool, right? You can also throw 2 lightsabers at the same time, which is pretty gnarly. The Old Republic from 2011, I feel like, is the most significant thing next. Being that it was the 3rd game set in that Old Republic timeline, I would say that it delivered on the expected amount of esoteric lightsaber designs. This is the screen debut of the, I don't know what you'd call it, like the broadsword lightsaber, the Quiond lightsaber maybe, but also the vented lightsaber with the kind of 45-degree additional blade, which is pretty cool. Kinect Star Wars from 2012 is the first game to really get the motion controls down. It's a very interesting idea. It's very cool. I remember being very excited, but in order for it to work with the Kinect, it was very slow, which made lightsabers a bit boring. I really love what this game is about, and honestly, I will always back a swing and a miss, so Kinect Star Wars has a real place in my heart for putting itself out there and for trying something new. Disney bought Star Wars in December of 2012, so everything I've mentioned in this video up until this point is now rendered entirely non-canon. Unless it was in a film, or the Clone Wars, or the Rebels cartoons, then that's out. Which interestingly means helicopter lightsabers, they're definitely in. I love helicopter lightsabers, so I'm happy as Larry about that. As the years roll on under Disney, we continue to get lightsaber games. I don't think any of them feel particularly significant in that they have all of the established lightsaber stuff that we have come to expect. And being that LEGO Force Awakens is the only Force Awakens tie-in game, it's worth mentioning that the most significant change to lightsaber lore that Disney introduced is Kylo Ren's crossguard lightsaber. Technically, LEGO The Force Awakens is the first time you can use a crossguard lightsaber in a computer game. They did add them to the Old Republic the same year, but LEGO got there first. Give them what they're due. Kylo's wibbly lightsaber design is caused by the Kyber crystal inside, which has become cracked. Ah yeah, you heard that right, Kyber crystals. They rendered everything non-canon, but they kept George's crystals in. After Disney bought Star Wars, the ludicrous amount of crystal canon was completely streamlined. All of that stuff was torn out. The thing that Luke said about the versatility of lightsabers was absolutely gutted. No, absolutely not. The only crystal that lightsabers use now are Kyber crystals. All the other stuff, forget it. And then of course, Kyber crystals actually become a really important part of the new Star Wars universe. You know, that whole thing about Jeddah in Rogue One being like one of the few places you can get Kyber crystals, and they retconned the Death Star. So like the big laser, that's actually a really big Kyber crystal. It's basically like a giant lightsaber. Yeah, the crystals, man, like seriously. Trilogy Arcade, Rogue Squadron 3, Clone Wars lightsaber duels, Connect Star Wars, they all lead here. The next step in the true lightsaber motion journey is Vader Immortal. A VR game set in the Star Wars universe, giving you real, actual control over a lightsaber that isn't painfully slow. There's 3 episodes of Vader Immortal, they're all about an hour each, which I think is great because that's about as long as I really want to play a VR game. But finally, this game puts the lightsaber in our hands. It's the ultimate wish fulfillment for a Star Wars computer game, and I can only imagine where we can go from here. Jedi Fallen Order from 2019 didn't do much in terms of lightsaber moves, but it did do some really cool stuff to shore up a lot of the stuff we'd seen before. And one of those is Ilum. Ilum was first mentioned way back in the novels based on the prequels, so way back in 2001. There's a book where baby Annie has to go to the crystal caves of Ilum to find his lightsaber crystal to build his very first lightsaber. After then, it's mentioned in a bunch of novels, and of course it's mentioned in the Old Republic because the Old Republic is absolutely obsessed with crystals. But it became canon in 2012 in an episode of the Clone Wars that shows all the baby Jedis going to Ilum to find their lightsaber crystals, and it sets up this idea that this is an important ritual on the path to becoming a Jedi. What is absolutely mental, and I didn't know until very recently, is that Starkiller Base from The Force Awakens is the planet Ilum. I didn't know that, and that kind of blew my mind. And it actually made going here in Fallen Order that much more significant. To feel connected as part of it in an interactive way, I just found that to be super wholesome and kind of sad at the same time. While you're there, of course, you build your own lightsaber, which is the first time you see someone actually doing this in a computer game. And there's all these different coloured lightsabers that Cal can have, and this is canon. So, you know, take that, George, colours are back, mate. I made a video a couple of years ago about Fallen Order and about how, you know, it doesn't really break any new ground, it doesn't do anything particularly new, but I love what it does because it does everything with such a level of authenticity. It feels like it's always belonged in the Star Wars universe. But actually there are some interesting things that it does do. Cal can move between 1 and 2 blades and a saber staff in real time, which I think is pretty great, like a Sarge Ventress could in the Clone Wars, but I think this is the first time we can do it in a game. As you probably know, the combat takes a lot of cues from the Souls-like genre, which means it creates a far more intentional game, which I think is very good, but it does nerf the lightsaber quite a lot, because it means there's lots of lightsaber-proof things in this world. As part of the Rise of Skywalker marketing campaign, Jedis and lightsabers came to Fortnite in 2019. In terms of lightsabers outside of computer games, we see Rey on screen with a yellow lightsaber, which is a massive, significant jump. And then of course we then saw that in DLC for Battlefront 2. If we want to follow the Old Republic lore, then this means she's somewhere between the warrior and the sage. The following year, The Sims 4 received the Journey to Batuu DLC in a very similar way to the Fortnite DLC from 2019. This sees you taking your Sims to Batuu, chipping about looking for Kyber crystals and finding little hilts to build your Sim's own lightsaber. And you can see over the last few games, from Fallen Order all the way through to Sims, you can see that they're pushing this toyetic aspect, this collectible building, customizing aspect, pushing this idea of identity and personal liberation. And that's just so good. That's very Star Warsy and very wholesome. And I love to see it. I love to see it. At the time of writing, Jedi Survivor is the most recent Star Wars game to feature a lightsaber, and in this game Cal Kestis can learn to use 4 different unique styles of lightsaber, plus a gun. Apparently this has divided the fan base, and I just want to say now that I have long been a fan of the Jedi with a gun. Luke had a gun in Empire, Kyle Katarn had a gun, Kanan in Jarrus, Ezra Bridger. This always seems to cause a shitstorm with fans, and I don't get it. Can you not see how cool this looks? Much like Fallen Order, Jedi Survivor doesn't really seem to add anything terribly new. It's all very much refining what we've seen previously in other Star Wars games. And I've got no critique to level at that. I think that's really cool. In fact, I would say Disney at large, with their handling of Star Wars, has very much been about refinement. Like Ahsoka Tano clarifying and removing the impurities from her lightsaber crystals. Yeah, that's the thing. That's why they're white. Yeah. Whew. Right, we are at the end of our journey. It's taken me a long time to make this video, as I'm sure you can imagine, and one of the things I noticed is I think games probably influenced the main Star Wars canon more than the other way around. I've always thought that the EU tends to be this incubator for new ideas anyway, and I've always appreciated seeing the EU influence the main canon. Really, the films have largely offered nothing to the lore and the development of the lightsaber, because it's the EU that has added all this wonderful context and all these bonkers crazy ideas. Some of it kind of gets left in the EU, and that's fine, but some of it actually makes it into canon, which I just think is so cool. So where are we going next? It feels wonderful to be getting new Star Wars games. I'm always grateful to get computer games set in the galaxy far, far away. As I've made this video, not only have I watched the evolution of the lightsaber, but also this interesting gamification of the Force and of Force powers. And I think there's still so much that could be done. Adding new stances, new lightsaber styles. There's still tons of new blade types we could go with. We could invent whole new types of lightsabers. What about different ways to control the lightsaber? I've never seen anyone throw it like a dart or like a spear. That would be pretty cool in a game. Or something like the sword familiar from Symphony of the Night, just like hovering around doing attacks on your behalf. That would be sweet. Let's go ham in the comments with this. Come up with your coolest lightsaber idea. Let's get it in there. What's your lightsaber sonar? I want to see it in the comments. This has been a blast to make. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I've had so much fun, and I hope you have too. If you're new here, please check out my previous Star Wars uploads. I love making Star Wars videos. There's tons of that up there. And if you like computer games, pop culture, popular media, specifically stuff from the 90s and the 2000s, that is what I focus on here on Stoked. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Have a fantastic afternoon. I'm off. See you later. Ta-da!